artesian solution Aeolian lacustrine hypothesis.
Oh, my gosh.
Did you get that? Repeat that back to me.
Latesian, Latusia, terrestrial, something.
No, not. We'll save that for a different hypothesis, the Latesian hypothesis.
Classic battle between aliens and terrestrials.
That's right.
Yeah, it was. I'll repeat it just for the sake of just being able to repeat it is an impressive thing, right? And like I always say, sometimes I even impress myself.
Yeah. Well,
and the thing of it is, I'm not easily impressed.
when you are impressed, it's isostatic impression.
That's what it is. I've been looking for that. I've been searching for years for the term to describe it. So thank you for that.
No problem, buddy.
Where was I going with this?
Give us the name of his hypothesis one more time. What is it?
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, so the artesian solution lacustrine Aeolian.
Wow.
So
Okay,
what are all?
I can actually explain it where you would kind of get it.
Okay.
You ever heard of an artesian well?
Yes.
Okay, now an artesian well is where you have what's called a perched groundwater table, where it's being blocked and it has to force its way to the surface under pressure.
Okay.
Right. So picture water trying to force its way to the surface under pressure. Now, what he realized back then was that the tilt of the bedrock in the southeastern coastal plain was towards the southeast. Right. Now, on top of this bedrock, you've got couple of million years of accumulation of coastal sediments, because picture this: the ocean comes in and it goes away. It comes in and might move 50 miles inland, which it has done, and then it'll drain back out, right? Each time as it does this, as it comes in, it's building shorelines and creating sand from the pounding surf, and then it goes back out, and after a while, you've got this huge accumulation, this thick accumulation, and it's generally unconsolidated. It hasn't lithified into rock yet, you see. So it's generally kind of a softer ground, right? So this is where these Carolina Bay imprints are found, is into this softer, sandy coastal plain. So artesian, water is moving along the ground, along the bedrock, probably in a fissure or somewhere that's under pressure. Right? Now, picture you've got a slab of rock and it's buried under, say, 100 feet of sandy type stuff, porous material. And now it comes to a break in that rock. It's flowing. The picture, you've got layers of rock. They're tilted, and between two of these layers, you've got this water flowing under pressure. It finds a break in the rock, and what it does is it turns up. Right?
Yeah.
It flows to the surface. That's basically what an artesian well is, right? So now picture this. You've got an upside down underground waterfall. Now, when a river comes and it flows over a precipice, it eats away the precipice, right? It erodes it back. This is what's called a receding cataract, right? So picture now you got this upside down underground waterfall rising to the surface, and the bedrock is limestone, by the way, and it's eating its way back up through that limestone. So it creates this, shall we say, this aperture as it erodes back that would be the equivalent of a canyon, except it's much smaller, of course, but it's eroded this through the limestone bedrock layer. See, as it's migrating uphill. Now, that's the artesian part. The solution part is the part I just described, where it's dissolving the limestone as it's flowing under it, and then it hits that opening. It now diverts and begins flowing upward, and where it makes that bend, that corner, it's dissolving the limestone. So it's dissolving the limestone along an axis, and then it begins to erode its way back up, right? So that's the solution part. Then the lacustrine part is that now that water rises to the surface and it begins to form a lake, right, or a pond. Now that's the lacustrine. That's the word lake, lacustrine, right? Then you get to the Aeolian part. Aeolian means wind. So now the wind blows the water, and the the wind blows the water in a special way so that the water forms, it erodes the coastline and circulates and shapes this lake into this perfect ellipse. So that's in essence his theory, the Artesian solution lacustrine aeolian.
Wow.
So it starts with this artesian aquifer, it dissolves the limestone, rises to the surface, forms a lake, and then the wind blowing on the lake shapes it into an ellipse.
But they...
So,
okay, that's
the
crazy.
problem is then in the 1960s and 70s, they began taking soundings and core samples and stuff from the bottom of the Carolina Bays, and that aperture that, in his theory, would have been in other words, you've got this crack,
Yeah.
In the bedrock that follows the long axis of the ellipse, if you can picture that.
Right.
So they went down, they began to explore the bedrock and discovered that there was no such thing ever under any of the Carolina Bays they looked at.
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to say, did he just armchair theorize this without going out there to look? Is that the idea? And then they eventually went out there and found out, oh, there aren't any artesian wells underneath these things.
Well, he did field exploration,
oh, okay.
But back then, he didn't have the means, the technological means, ground penetrating radar and all the things that came later where they were actually able to go and look under in the bedrock and also take coring samples and stuff. So,
okay.
I would say they should have said the same thing to him that they did to J. Harlan Bretz, which is like, where do you get all the wind?
Yeah, right.
You don't have a source for that wind. It didn't happen.
Right. So that's cool. You guys know who Bretz is. I think that's great because, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, nobody knew, just say the name Bretz, who knew who J. Harlan Bretz was,
I
other
learned
than about a dozen geologists out in the Northwest.
I learned from Bretz from Graham Hancock's book that you were a part of. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have questions actually about the number one about the drumlins. I've always wondered this, like those features look like, basically like the description of all that water moving underneath, under pressure underneath the ice across the landscape. What does that look like at the forward tongue of the glacier? Is that water like coming out of there like crazy, like, exploding out from underneath the glacier under pressure? Is that what's happening, or is this?
That's exactly right. It's emerging from the glacier in the form of an outburst flood.
Oh.
That's what and yes, and massive. And I if we had graphics, I could show you some photographs of where some of these outbursts took place. And yeah, it's pretty mind blowing.
Yeah.
Well, clearly the Scablands is where the outburst took place. Although, now see, here's the thing. In the case of an impact, which, getting back to that, the Younger Dryas impact, to me is the most plausible explanation for how you could suddenly introduce huge amounts of energy into the system, cause extreme melting. One of the main objections to that theory is that, it's dismissed because they're saying, well, that would be a singular event. And we know that there was melting at 14,000 years ago and at 13,000 and at 11,000 years. So, no, that couldn't be, because and a very similar argument is made against the megafaunal extinction. Well, we know that the megafauna didn't all go extinct at one time, right? So therefore, it couldn't have been a comet or some type of an impact that decimated the megafauna. But see, I think what they're doing is they're creating a straw man, because we're realizing how complex some of these cosmic interactions can actually be. And it's, yes, certainly, you could have one big dumb rock that comes in and hits the Earth, boom, a singular event. And then there's a lot of chaos and turmoil and everything and problems, and then things settle out, and then it goes back to normal. And certainly that is one plausible scenario. But there are other scenarios that are a whole lot more complicated than that, and to get into what those scenarios might be, I kind of turn to these, the neo-catastrophists from Britain primarily, centered around William Napier and Victor Klube and several others who have been working on the consequences and the evidence for interactions between Earth and cosmic material since at least the 1970s, right? They wrote a book, you'll like this, a book that I read a long time ago, came out in 1980. It is called The Cosmic Serpent. Which for historical reasons, I would highly recommend getting a copy of it and reading it, because they don't have, some of the things that they get into there have maybe, become a little bit dated, but overall, they were right on the money way back in 1980. They were like some of the first guys that began looking and going, you know what, the Earth may have been pummeled far more frequently and far more recently than anybody has assumed up to this point. And they were definitely in the forefront of that kind of thinking. But in that scenario, you could have a large celestial object, say a comet, that comes into the inner solar system and then begins undergoing a series of fragmentation events. Something along the line, we've now seen enough comets. We've seen 4 or 5 comets whose nuclei have disintegrated under various scenarios. One, probably the most famous, is the Shoemaker-Levy 9, which was discovered in March of '93, and was a comet nucleus that had just made a close passage by Jupiter, and it had gone within the Roche limit of Jupiter, which is within the limit of Jupiter's gravity field, or the gravitational force. The force of Jupiter's gravity field overcomes the internal cohesion of the object, and it disaggregates, right? And that's exactly what happened. It came around, it went through Jupiter's super powerful gravity field and got torn apart. And when David Levy discovered it initially, and then that was followed up by Carolyn and Gene Shoemaker, it was just beginning to come apart. And over the next several weeks, it separated into 21 separate pieces. So what had been one nucleus became 21. It spawned 21 smaller nuclei, right? So they began to spread out in what was called the cosmic string of pearls. And so after 3 months of observations, the astronomers were able to calculate the orbital elements. They had enough information, enough data to calculate the orbital elements, by which they were able to reconstruct the geometry of its orbital ellipse. They also knew that the tempo enough, and the mathematics of orbiting bodies are well enough known that as it's approaching the sun, it's going to accelerate, and then it's going to come out from around the sun, and as it's moving away from the sun, it's going to decelerate. And all of that can be, that's just the mathematics that can be worked out with calculus and regular observations. So they were, after 3 months of observations, they were able to predict that its orbit was going to intersect Jupiter's orbit. At the same time, Jupiter was going to be there, right?
Right.
So at the time this happened, then in July of '94, this was the most watched astronomical event in history of astronomical observations. And what we saw was that the 21 pieces plunged into the Jovian atmosphere and raised these gigantic plumes, some of them which were bigger than the Earth, and they unleashed tremendous amounts of energy. Now, each one of those, had they not plunged into Jupiter, but had, let's say, gone through another round or 2 or 3, each one of those nuclei could have further fragmented into other nuclei, and those into other nuclei, all the way down to cosmic dust and everything in between. You get it?
Yeah.
So now you've got this really complex range of possibilities, right? Earth encountering this stuff. On the one hand, let's say it just encounters dust. Well, in that case, what's going to happen, it's going to increase the opacity of the Earth's atmosphere, and it's going to reflect a lot of sunlight back into space, right? Suppose it intersects a stream, of a swarm of this debris, where each one of these fragments might be 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 feet in diameter, but packing the power of a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
See, now in the scenario of the British neocatastrophists, there may be essentially storms, cosmic storms, if you will, right? There may be larger objects, and we've observed these larger objects that have an entourage of smaller objects with them. You see, So you may have one or two big impacts and then a whole bunch of smaller impacts. All of these things are plausible scenarios, you see.
Isn't it that aren't there some strange like strings of like vertically aligned craters that they've found on the moon that may be explained by this exactly thing, like with the comet
Katina, yes, there are, and in fact, there's probable several of those that have been discovered on the Earth. There's a whole string of, I think, 8 crypto explosion structures that reach from Tennessee across Missouri. I think there's 8 of them, and they're in a line, and they appear to all be the same age. And they are probably, it was probably that type of an impact that produced those.
Crypto explosion structures. I'm going to have to remember that term. That's awesome.
That's a good one, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So that was what they were originally called when they discovered them and didn't really know what they were. Now, it's been proven, I think, that 4 of them are impact related. I visited, let's see, which ones did I have? Visited 3 or 4 of them. Gosh, way back, when was that? 90s? No, probably the early 2000s, yeah. Jephthah Knob, I visited that one. That was one of the first ones.
Right after the Y2K cataclysm, you went out and did more geology.
I did, yes. Right after the Y2K cataclysm, yeah. While I was out in the wasteland, it was the aftermath of the Y2K.
Dude, I like the way you describe the comets breaking up. It reminds me of just like, it's like a river, breaking down the rocks into the silt from these huge boulders, just breaking it down, but they're in the river of this cosmic river.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was just cool visuals I got there.
Well, I mean, a meteor stream, it's referred to as a stream. And, and I think that the metaphor is appropriate because it is like a stream. And occasionally the Earth, crosses the streams. And so, late October, early November, every fall, Earth crosses the torrid stream as the stream is flowing in towards the sun. And then in late June, early July, it crosses the stream again as the stream is coming away from the sun and going back out towards Jupiter, to the Jovian orbit. So, it's a good metaphor. It is like that. Now, here's the thing. If, the torrid stream now is probably an old stream because it's diffuse. A younger stream, like I think the Geminids is pretty young. It takes like 1 to 2 days, I think, to cross the Geminids, whereas it takes over a week to cross the torrid stream. So like a young stream is not going to be very diffuse.
Okay, yeah.
It's going to the material is going to be more clustered and more concentrated along the orbital pathway. Because during the initial breakup, what you have to picture now, picture this comet nuclei. It's on this big elliptical racetrack going out to the Jupiter orbit, coming back in, going around the sun. Every time it makes a close by Jupiter, or as it comes around the sun, the gravity and the heat activate it, and it begins to disaggregate. It begins to discharge volatiles. Pieces begin to spall off, right? It may not completely disintegrate, but it always leaves some behind, almost like a snake sloughing off its skin, right? So that is kind of an apt metaphor as well, as far as thinking of a cosmic serpent and a snake, molting its skin and then growing a new skin. When the nuclei object passes the sun, it will molt. It will spall off part of its outer skin. Then that gets spread into that orbital racetrack, right? Now, if it keeps going, what's going to happen is that it's going to eventually completely disintegrate because cometary nuclei are very loosely aggregated, right? So it doesn't take all that much external force to cause them to come apart. But at some point, depending on when and where throughout this whole process, you might have like clusters. You might have a place where the debris is much more concentrated and dense, and other places in the orbit where it's much thinner, right, and finer. Now, if the Earth's orbit intersects that of the comet, when it's crossing the comet, let's say in a zone where the material is dispersed widely, it'll probably get right on through without anything other than just, a nice, light show from a meteor shower.
Yeah.
But then let's say that it comes across closer to the comet nucleus where there may be a much greater density of material. Now, there could be obviously a much greater possibility of some kinds of impacts to take place. And so I think that's kind of how we have to begin thinking about this scenario. And what would make sense to me is that the last phase of the Ice Age, which is called the Late Wisconsin, really seemed to begin around 25 or 26,000 years ago. It almost appears as if, there was this interim period. Remember I mentioned that there were like forests growing in Canada 35 to 40,000 years ago?
Yes.
That, were inconsistent with the idea of a long, unbroken Ice Age continuum. But so, so then I kind of lost my train of thought there. Must be getting after 11 where I'm at.
Well, I did want to ask you, because you mentioned at the beginning that there were the idea is coming now to that there were 3 large meltwater pulses, and I've known,
Yes.
because of listening to you and studying up on this about meltwater pulse 1A and 1B, and I've always thought of 1A as being the beginning of the Younger Dryas, and then 1B as being at the end of it. But is there one that's earlier, like just a one previous to that?
1A is actually dated at 14.6
okay.
BP.
All right.
And then the Balling-Alarod Younger Dryas boundary is dated at somewhere now between 12.8 and 12.9 thousand years ago. Now, I wasn't sure if there was a meltwater pulse that coincided with that, but yes, there's been some dated evidence that definitely shows there was a huge meltwater pulse into the Arctic Ocean that coincides with the onset of the Younger Dryas. There was also a huge flood through the Lake Superior Basin that seemed to emanate from Lake Nipigon, which was now presently Lake Nipigon, that dates to the onset of the Younger Dryas. Do you guys have access to Google Earth?
We do.
Pull up Google Earth.
Okay.
Open it up, and anybody who is listening to this can do the same thing. And you're going to focus on find Lake Superior.
Okay.
I just opened it on my computer. Are you there?
I'm pulling it up. I'm
getting
getting
it open. He's going to Lake Superior right now.
Okay. So I want you to go.
Were you over there?
I don't know. I was looking at
Africa.
Africa. Be quiet.
Yeah, no. Lake Superior is not in Africa, Russ.
All right, we're there.
Yeah.
Okay. You got Lake Superior.
I do.
Okay, go to the north, and just to the north of Lake Superior, you'll see a big sort of elliptical lake.
Oh, yes.
You see it?
I see it.
That is Lake Nipigon.
Ah.
And I am about willing to bet money that's an impact site right there.
Oh man!
Wow, that was an enormous one. Holy crap!
Oh yeah, that would have been a big one, and it would have been moving fast. Now, this is okay. So now, you got the little toolbar at the top.
I got it.
If you click the view in Google Maps, click on Google Maps then, so you can view the same thing in Google Maps.
Okay.
And
what am I looking for?
And now I'm in Google Maps, and you're going to zoom in on Lake Nipigon. So I'm still loading up. I think I'm just about there.
Oh.
Do you have? Okay, now you should have a little, like on my Google Maps, I've got a little toolbar on the lower right.
Okay.
Plus, minus, my north-south arrow, and then a 3D button to tilt the view.
Oh, yeah.
Click that. And now what you're looking at there is you're looking at a depression with a lake, and it's got a raised rim all the way around it except for the southern quadrant that connects it to Lake Superior. Do you know how to go back to 2D and if you go to your upper left and do your drop-down menu to terrain. Do you know how to get to the terrain? Or go, go down to the lower left, and there should be a little box down there to go to the map view.
Okay. I'm trying to do this on my phone, so it's a little different, but I'm pulling it up. Yeah.
Oh, you're on your phone?
Yeah, you can get terrain on maps here.
I can get it.
He's pulling it
Yeah,
up.
I do. I get it on mine all the time. It's just, I guess it takes a little longer. But yeah, then you can get it on your phone. And so anybody listening can go ahead and do this, and so they can see.
Okay, we're on terrain now. We got terrain open.
Okay, you're on terrain. Good. Let me pull up my terrain here. Okay. Coming up. Come on. There we go. All right. So now you can now what I want you to do is look at the southern quadrant. And if you zoom in, you'll see Pine Portage. You'll see Cameron Falls.
Uh-huh.
You see all that?
Yes, sir.
Zoom in and look at that landscape.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that is a landscape that was eroded by catastrophic flooding. Extreme.
Massive
Do you see the Black
chasms and
Sturgeon
stuff.
River?
Yes.
What?
Massive chasms, it looks like, or ravines.
Oh, yeah. Massive chasms. There are massive cataracts. There were receding cataract waterfalls in here. There were coulees.
Cameron Falls.
You see Black Sturgeon. Say that again.
Cameron Falls. What was the river name you were talking about?
Pine Portage.
If you go just to the west of Cameron Falls, you'll see the Black Sturgeon River. There's the Black Sturgeon River Provincial Park.
Okay, yep. I see it.
And you follow that down, and you see that's a massive erosive sluiceway. And if you look down at the bottom, you'll see that what you've got. Notice that you've got that coulee, that canyon-like feature that then opens out onto the smooth plain. You can see the little Black Sturgeon River coming. Okay, now picture you've got a huge flood coming down through there, and it's carrying huge loads of sediment. In that smooth area in the foreground, southeast of the mouth of that canyon, that's the sediment that was washed out by these floods and left there.
Holy
Are you
crap.
getting the picture? Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're beginning to see it.
Oh my
now,
God.
the water then flowed through the floor of Lake Superior. Go down to Isle Royale. Can you see it? Zoom out and you'll see Isle Royale National Park.
I see
the
it.
island.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Zoom in and look at the texture, and you'll see right there, etched into that island,
striated.
is the direction of flow. You can see it. The move from. Can you get it? Can you see it?
Yes. Yes, that's amazing.
Mind blown.
Scoured right into. Yeah. It is amazing. It's totally amazing.
So
And you can see that-
what's the rock there? I mean, that island, is it sedimentary rock that's all etched
That's
like
basalt.
that, or is that?
It's basalt.
That's basalt, and it's just been etched. You can see how the flow has etched. Now, see, it was first it's etched by the glacier, right? The glacier comes over, but this was not the direction of glacier flow. This was the direction of water flow.
Wow.
See, so then if you come down, follow down where Duluth is, see at the tip, that's like a massive sluiceway there. The water spilled out over the landscape, flowed down, and flowed into the Mississippi, or into what is now the St. Croix River Valley.
Okay.
And if you go to Taylor's Falls, that was like a Venturi plume. That was an area of constriction where the water was forced through a narrower passage, and it created intense turbulence, and that turbulence formed underwater colking, or underwater tornadoes, if you will, that then burrowed holes into the basalt bedrock up to 20 feet wide and 80 feet deep.
That's insane.
So you can trace the pathway of this flood all the way down into the Mississippi River Valley. And it came out of the Lake Nipigon Basin, and it's dated at 12,900 years ago. So there you go.
Wow.
There you go. So, I mean, on this trip that we're going on, we're going to see some of the Native American culture.
The Chaco Canyon.
The Chaco
culture.
Canyon culture. So,
well, first let's talk about the trip. let's name it right. It's Contact at the Cabin.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, yeah. Go and contact one of the reasons we're talking to Randall right now is because we're going to Contact at the Cabin. It is set up by Grimerica, the Grimerica podcast, and they're doing this Contact at the Cabin in Pagosa Springs. So we are going on that trip. We're going to be there all week with Randall and Grimerica, and there are going to be other guests, and we are going to be going on field trips. And Randall's going to be giving a couple of presentations, and we're going to be rocking out around the bonfire, and it's going to be awesome. And anybody who can go should totally go to this. So now
look it up. Look it up.
Yeah, look it up. Contact at the Cabin. Look. So now, ask your question. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm thinking about, and I'm fascinated with, Native American artifacts. Like around here in the hill country where we live, there's midden mounds. They're burn rock mounds. Okay. I've crawled on the top of them, picked up little arrowheads. You can see all their work and everything, and it's a huge fascination for me. And I look at the landscape here and see how it's been complete, like this. We're on this plateau that's been completely eroded away, and there's huge canyons and all this stuff. And listening to the things you've said about scale invariance, and I'm on this little river. And there's these massive cliff walls on either side of me.
Miles away from the little bitty river.
Way far. Yeah, it's just, so it's looking at all of that. And now looking on Google Earth at what you're talking about. That is on such a much more massive scale. And I imagine this, whatever this cataclysm was that caused the melting of the glaciers, coming down, all of that water and everything coming down through the central United States area and creating the Dust Bowl. That's kind of what my image of it is, and just basically wiping out whatever may have been built there. If the pyramids from Mexico came all the way up into the central United States,
they're all
we
gone
wouldn't
now.
know.
Yeah,
right. That's kind of what I think.
Well, here what it appears is that there was a culture here. The culture, and this is what one of the things Graham is getting to in his new book, America Before, is that there is evidence that there was cultural activity going back tens of thousands of years ago. And it seems like part of the story is that there has been regular interruptions. The last major interruption was the Younger Dryas, when the Clovis culture, which hadn't been around very long, but left a very distinct and definite imprint across the whole continent, unglaciated continent, over a period of about 300 to 400 years, they show up suddenly, and then even more suddenly, they disappear. And they just, passed off the stage, and nobody really knows what happens to them. And then it appears to have been about a 600-year to millennium hiatus before new cultural groups move into this vacated territory. Now, what's interesting about that is where we're going to be going, and we'll be going to Mesa Verde, is that something similar on a smaller scale happened. In fact, I refer to it as the Great Abandonment. It was as if all of a sudden this whole culture just got up and left.
Yeah.
Right? And this happened right about the late 1200s or early 1300s, which seems to be interesting because in Europe, it seems to coincide pretty close, with the onset of the first phase of the Little Ice Age in Europe. I don't know what the correlation is, but this has been one of the profound mysteries about ancient America is what happened to the Chacoan culture.
Yes.
It was there and then it was not there. And what's interesting, too, is the way they adapted to this landscape, they utilized the geomorphic effects of gigantic floods that had created these overhanging cliffs, you see, and that's where they built their, at least in Mesa Verde, see. But that culture appears to be the same as part of this whole cultural Chacoan culture that was pretty much distributed over 20,000 square kilometers of the San Juan Basin and up into Utah, up into the Durango area. We'll be visiting Chimney Rock, and that is one of the most spectacular and far-reaching of the Chacoan outliers, by which they made their whole. Yeah, we'll be getting into that when we'll be doing a presentation on that to show to have a better understanding of how they were trying to link earth and sky, because that was a big part of what their whole cultural orientation was this
above,
linking
so below.
between the terrestrial and celestial, as above, so below, etc.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which, of course, is consistent with all of these archaic cultures from all over the planet,
Right.
Yes.
extending over thousands of years.
Why do you think that is? What is it? I mean, this is so interesting and yet strange to me. But at the same time, I see Kyle and I are very fascinated with ancient texts. So we study them a lot and we talk about them a lot on the podcast. So on the one hand, it seems like these people that in these preceding cultures and some of them built these amazing structures that are still in some ways unexplained, but even ones that didn't seem to have a better understanding of the cosmic environment in which the earth lives in than our quote unquote modern advanced civilization seems to have. In other words, there's a lot of people in the sort of mainstream view is that, well, cosmic stuff isn't that big of a deal. It only happens once every couple of million years. And so it's interesting to see that. But at the same time, you see the same correlation in the ancient texts where they say things like when Plato's talking about Atlantis, or in the story of the Noah's flood, you get this idea of some sort of moral or decadent decay right before something wipes everybody out.
Where we start having hubris and thinking that we're the all-important thing, and
Right.
blah, blah, blah.
Right. Well, what was it? Was it in the book of Matthew, where one of the, I'm not going to be preaching, biblical sermons here, but there is a lot of, just like all of these ancient texts, whether it's the Bible or the Vedas or the Bundahish or the Tao Te Ching, they all contain wisdom in their own way, right?
Yes,
and they're
absolutely.
all worthy of study.
Yes.
Right. But what was it when one of the disciples asked Jesus, when will we know when the end of the age is coming? And his response was something like this: in the days of Noah, as it was in the days of Noah, when the people were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day that the flood came and swept them all away, so will it be again in the days of the coming of the Son of Man.
Right.
Well, I think his point is that people were, it's really the same point that you read in the Hopi mythology, where the cataclysm came on them when they forgot the cosmic plan, when they forgot that they were part of something bigger, and they ignored it, and as a consequence, they suffered from that.
Right.
In the Hopi legends, it's, they forgot the plan of the Creator. And
Yes.
because of that, they became vulnerable. And what do we see going on today? I mean, think about 99% of what occupies people's minds and consciousness and their attention.
Right. Eating, drinking,
And,
stuff like that.
and not that there's anything wrong.
Right.
That's not the point. The point is not that there's anything wrong with eating or drinking or marrying or giving in marriage, because that's the day-to-day stuff that has to go on. The problem becomes when that is the extent of your consciousness.
Right.
Yeah.
The full
And
extent.
the higher
yes.
things of this world and the higher things of life get shunted off to the sidelines and ignored.
Yes.
Because, going back to the fires, talking about the fires, one of the lessons of those that I find over and over, and I also find this over and over again as I study various disasters of all kinds, right? There's always people that have premonitions.
Yes.
Over and over again. These are people who sense that there's something, right? And generally everybody else is oblivious. But, there are stories like one of the stories of the Great Peshtigo fire was by the Reverend Peter Purdon, and he wrote a very, very interesting account. He was one of the survivors of the Peshtigo fire. And he wrote a very interesting account of his experience coming through that, and it's really a wrenching tale, only because that it's almost impossible to believe, but it's all true.
Yes.
But one of the things that he recounts in there is that even when he saw these portents of this oncoming firestorm, that something was about to happen, he would go through the town there, and he would see that people were just oblivious to it. And like next door to where his church was, he said they were having some kind of a party, and the people were out there, and the ladies were dressed elegantly, and they were laughing and giggling and eating and drinking, right?
Yes.
But not paying attention to these obvious, ominous signs of nature. Then he goes into the town, and the couple of taverns there. There's lumbermen who are coming in, and they're drinking and carousing and having fun and yelling, but totally oblivious. And then, like 2 hours later, these people are all dead.
Right.
And he lived because he was seeing, and people who got this sense that there was this thing coming, they were the ones who made it to the river and survived. The rest of them got roasted.
Right. I was just listening. Right. I was just listening to one of your presentations on that, and you said that, I think you said that either he or someone else who was a witness to all this said that there were like a very small percentage of people there who just woke up that morning, and for reasons they couldn't really understand, they started preparing for something to happen.
Yes, and this is a consistent thing that you find out when you begin to study natural disasters or any kind of disaster like that. There seems to be something that some people are sensitive to that tends to give them forewarning.
Yes.
That is wild. Oh my God.
Isn't it? Yeah, it is wild.
So
stuff.
it's difficult. It's difficult now. Like thinking of it nowadays, like we have the internet and there's just constant. Everyone's just putting every single thing that they're thinking and doing out there. So how do you know who to pay attention to? If you're not one of those sensitive people, but you might know, well, hey, this person kind of has a sense, something's going on.
Well, this is where I think you have to have a well-developed faculty of reason. You have to be able to look at things and weigh evidence, and we are endowed with reason for a purpose. Reason serves a function just like intuition and instinct serves functions, right? So instinct might give you the initial impression, the initial push in a certain direction, into instinct or intuition, but then reason is how you begin to translate that impression into action, see?
Yeah.
So I rely a lot on my own sense of reason and my own sense of what's right or wrong, which is something, if you live a certain way and you have a certain attitude and consciousness about life, I think these are the things you inevitably learn those things if you live long enough,
Yes.
You eventually see enough bullshit that you can recognize it when you're confronted with it,
Absolutely.
And I've seen plenty of it. And once upon a time in my life, I saw it and didn't recognize it for what it was. You see, but part of getting burned as you go through the experience of life is you learn. You get burned and you learn, and then next time you don't get burned.
Yep.
Yeah. So when you were describing, the breaking up of comets and how sometimes it can come all the way down to dust, or even just gases. And and I'm listening to your talks on these fires, and I've always thought the Chicago fire was a strange thing. The whole thing with Miss O'Leary's cow or whatever, it just sounds like crap. And then you look at the explanations that people, or the descriptions that people gave of fire coming out of the sky, or I don't know if it was the Peshtigo fire or the other one you were talking about, where they estimated from the distances that people were able to see the flame column, that the flame column must have been 5 miles tall. That's not a forest fire. That's something else. And so I was wondering if you thought that, because I can't remember if you said this or not, maybe you did, but that if it's possible that that the earth runs into just the gases and dust, and that stuff comes down at meteoric speeds, and when it hits the ground, it's burning and it sets everything on fire.
Yeah, I think that probably happens way more frequently than we think. But unless the conditions are right, there's not going to be enough of accumulation of it to ever become flammable. But if you have a period of drought and you have a large fuel load and you have perhaps a high pressure temperature inversion, at the same time you have an influx, you may be able to reach combustible concentrations. I think that would be the way to approach this kind of to thinking about this. Now, the flame column that you referenced, that was the Hinckley fire.
Right, the Hinckley fire.
The Hinckley fire, yeah. And that, my interest in this actually goes back to my childhood, because, that's Hinckley, Minnesota, and that's on the route from Minneapolis to Duluth. And frequently with both my parents and my grandparents up there, we made excursions up to Duluth. And I particularly remember my grandmother, who was very interested in this kind of stuff. We would drive through Hinckley, and she would invariably have to tell the story of the Hinckley fire and, how they escaped in the in the train and all this. This was the Hinckley fire was in September of 1894. The Chicago fire and Peshtigo fire were October 8th of 1871. So yeah, here's from The Wall of Flames. This is the account of it by Lawrence H. Larson. It was published by the North Dakota Institute for Regional Studies. It's called The Wall of Flames, the Minnesota Forest Fire of 1894. On the 1st of September 1894, a murderous juggernaut of flames swept through the Minnesota pineries. The huge firestorm, 30 miles wide and 5 miles high, advanced across the land at a rate of 30 miles an hour. It threw fireballs and embers thousands of feet ahead, spawning its own whirlwinds and tornadoes of fire.
God.
So the released fury had the force of multiple Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs. So really, that's what it was like. It was like this. I mean, can you picture something like this?
No,
it's
that's insane.
It's hard to picture.
Yeah. So, what started this fire? This is from Burning an Empire, 1943, by Stuart H. Holbrook. What started this fire that became such a tremendous sea of flames that took so many lives? As is the case with most other great forest conflagrations, the cause and place of origin will never be known. I have been over every square mile of the country, if not every acre, and have talked with many survivors. I have read hundreds of contemporary reports of eyewitnesses. Nobody knows or ever knew exactly where this fire started.
Yeah.
But here's an interesting poem. This was a poem written by survivor Horace Wilcox, right? This is a short poem. The fire swept o'er us with terrible wrath and left desolation and terror strewed in its path. The flames approached with a sickening crash, and fair Hinckley town disappeared like a flash. But Hinckley saw another sight as the afternoon grew dark as night, when, like the handwriting on the wall, the population recognized Jehovah's call. Fly for your lives, come let us fly, that we may escape the fire that descends from the sky.
Ugh, man. What weren't you I don't remember if this was Hinckley or the Peshtigo or one of the other ones or the Chicago fire, but you talked about there were witnesses that said that like balloon shapes, balls of flame would drop out of the sky and hit people that were hiding in open fields, basically. So they would run to the fields to get away from the fires in the forest and the town. And then these balls of fire would come out of the sky and just incinerate all the people in the field all at once.
All at once, yes. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Yes. Here from this is excerpts from the Ashes, the story of the Hinckley Fire of 1894, and this is quoting a survivor. The fierce flaming heat became so intense in certain localities it created what seemed to be a vacuum. The vacuum would then quickly fill with violent and explosive gases. With a river so near, there would have been time to seek safety in flight, and even to have removed goods if no greater danger menaced the townspeople than an ordinary forest fire. But when fire burst over the town, it came in fierce explosions and in streaks, with suffocating, choking gases that paralyzed the victims even before the burning. It came too quickly for analysis. It baffled science. It could not be accounted for. It was a phenomenon that defies all description. It did not crawl or creep, but burst and exploded. It roared, seethed, and boiled. On the ground, it swept forward in walls and cylinders of flame, and in the air it soared in massive balls of fire and gas. Its heat was intense and searing, and devoured kingly pines in minutes.
Holy crap.
Yeah. That's the eyewitnesses from.
Yeah, I remember you saying that they went back and were looking at after the fire was done, and they went back and looked and like at some of the enormous trees that had been these old growth trees. Not only had the trees trees that had survived multiple forest fires before this, multiple forest fires, they went back and looked and like not only the trees were completely gone, but the root balls had been burned completely out of the ground.
Yes, right down in 10, 20 feet into the ground.
Yeah.
So the roots themselves had been utterly consumed.
That's, I have always thought that I'm just like, that's not a regular forest fire. Something else is happening there. Oh man. Well, Randall, this has been fantastic. We don't want to keep you too long. I know you've got a lot of stuff to do, but why don't you?
I've got to get my beauty rest.
Yeah, you got to get your beauty rest, man. So once again, we are going to be. You want to give the layout of the contact at the cabin? Tell it in your own words what we're going to do, and then we'll close the show out.
Well, I'm still, my attention now has shifted. I showed you I was been engaged for the last 6 weeks in trying to get this project finalized and ready for submission, and I think it's there. So I've just, it's kind of how I have to work sometimes when I get into these complicated situations. I have to just kind of put everything aside and just focus on the one thing. That's kind of where I've been. So I'm kind of now turning to really mapping out in detail what we're going to do from day to day, where we're going to go. And the more I'm getting into it, the more interesting it's sounding because I'm learning things. See, this will be a little different because this will be more like a recon. This will be because some of the areas we'll be going, I haven't gone yet. They're on my list of things that I need to investigate, but I have not yet. Now, some of the places I've been, like Chimney Rock, I've been there a couple of times. So yeah, I will be able to give a nice a presentation on Chimney Rock and what's going on there, what its connection is to the whole Chaco and infrastructure in the San Juan Basin, how its astronomy worked, and then we'd be able to go out and see it firsthand.
Yeah,
we will certainly go to Mesa Verde, and I'm looking at some other places as well that's within a reasonable drive. I think we probably take a trip up the Animas River because there are some giant catastrophic flood terraces that I think would be very interesting to look at.
Awesome.
So over the next week or two, I'm really going to be getting down, crunching the numbers and studying the maps and figuring out routes and doing all of that stuff with my buddy Brad, who of course helps me with that end of the thing.
Right.
All right, cool. Well, we'll keep our listeners updated as we learn more every Monday.
That's right.
We do our conference, so
yeah,
it's we're really looking forward to it. So
cool. So am I.
Thanks a lot for coming on, and we'll be talking to you soon, sir.
Great. Yeah, next Monday, I guess.
That's right.
May we all
guys.
take our faculties and use our reason and do the wise thing.
That's right. And go to Pagosa Springs and do Snake Force Recon.
All right. All right. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Thanks. So long, guys.
Bye. All right. That was our interview with Randall Carlson.
It was part one. So we had this crazy stuff happen where we ended up having to call on the phone, and then we couldn't get the watcher on because, of course, as you all know, we use the phone as the internet connection.
Yes.
And there are other interesting parts of why it wasn't working, but we're not going to get into that. Basically, what we decided to do in the first break was add the watcher as a three-way call, and he just muted his phone. So he was able to really listen in for the whole second half of the show. Randall hangs up, and we start talking with the watcher afterwards. I stopped the recording, and then I guess we didn't get the manual for three-way calling, but it called Randall's phone back.
Yeah, it automatically, apparently, this is what happened. We're talking with the watcher. We're talking inside baseball. We're explaining to him the technical difficulties we were having, but we were saying like, dude, but it was awesome because it's Randall Carlson, and he did a great job, and the interview was great. And then the watcher starts talking to us about some of the stuff that Randall was talking about at the end there with the fires. And then suddenly at some point we all take a break to think about what we're saying. And then we hear Randall's voice. Can you guys hear me? And we're just like, because apparently if you're on a three-way call with somebody and one person hangs up, but you, as the initiator of the three-way call, don't then hang up the call and you stay on the line with the other guy in the three-way call, the phone automatically calls the person who hung up. It calls them back.
My theory is only on landlines.
Yeah, it could be that.
But anyway.
So Randall picked the phone up at some unknown point and was listening to us talk with the Watcher. And eventually he told us, like, can you guys hear me? And we're just like, holy crap. So then he had heard the stuff that the Watcher was saying about his family being from one of the places where the fires were. I can't remember the name of it. And he just went right back into explaining stuff. And we got
so I hit record him.
we got like a sequel. So that's what we're going to play for you right now.
He asked us, is this round 2? So here you go, round 2.
Sounds supernatural. Like they've gotten to the point now where none of the people who lived through the fire are still there. So it almost sounds like fanciful tales.
Right.
Because it's that unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it does begin to sound like the supernatural. It really does. I mean, when I was, let's see, what year? I guess we went up there in 1995 is when I went up there. When we were researching for this, I was consultant on a show that was shown on TBS and CNN about 6 or 8 times back in 96 and 97 called Fire from the Sky.
Mm-hmm.
So I went up there and we interviewed, I don't remember his name, Robert, somebody who was curator of the museum at the time. And he let me have access to a bunch of these unpublished accounts and stuff.
Oh,
and
wow.
Really amazing stuff. Amazing stuff.
Wow.
So I have a lot of that that's into my my multimedia presentation on the fires, the cosmic firestorms. In fact, just by coincidence, yesterday, near where I live, there's a used bookstore, and they get people drop off books all the time there, and they put a shelf outside of books that just kind of overflow books that they think that they're not going to sell. And I was there, and I happened to look, and I saw one called The Big Burn, and it was about this massive another one of these cosmic firestorms, only this one was western Montana, northern Idaho, back in 1910. And so I just started reading into that book a little bit last night by coincidence. And that in fact, I do have that firestorm as the final firestorm. I've got 6 or 7 of those firestorms in my multimedia presentation, going back to this one that was in New Brunswick back in the 1830s. Then I end with the one in the Big Burn in 1910. So what's unique is that each one of these firestorms has very similar type of phenomena. You know, fire from the sky, supernatural kind of things associated with it, these extraordinary stories of just the bizarre effects, you know, where literally somebody will be unscathed and 10 feet away from them, somebody is reduced to a pile of ashes.
And didn't you say that in some cases at least they start like practically on the same day? I mean, like different years, but like in October at 9 o'clock, basically on practically the same day.
Yeah. Well, both Peshtigo, the biggest fire in Michigan, which is the Ministy, I think is how they pronounce it, Ministy fire, the Chicago fire, and the Wisconsin fire in Peshtigo, all 3 started Sunday night, around within 1 hour of each other, as best they can tell, around 9 o'clock.
That's crazy.
On October 8th, 1871. So now, were you guys, do you remember this? Wildfires ravage northern California with shocking speed. Santa Rosa, California, this is, 2017.
Yes.
An onslaught of wildfires across a wide swath of northern California broke out almost simultaneously, then grew exponentially, swallowing up properties from wineries to trailer parks and tearing through both tiny rural towns and urban subdivisions.
Yes.
So, and then there was these huge fires that just consumed Napa Valley.
Yep.
Right? More than 5,700 homes and other structures destroyed, 90,000 people evacuated. The cause of the fires remained under investigation on Monday. So now get this. When was the Chicago fire?
It was in October?
October what? What date? It was a Sunday.
8th?
October 8th. October 8th, right? So if we go back to this early firestorm, the first one that I document it was the Great Miramichi Fire. And this is way back, this was 1825. The first forest fire of catastrophic size to get into North American history swept the wild Miramichi River Valley of New Brunswick in October of 1825. Although this was a Canadian fire, the worst the Dominion has ever experienced. And here's the key. Other forest fires on the same day were taking a heavy toll of timber and farm property in nearby Maine. Now, the date of this fire was October 9th. So only one, October 7th. So it was only one day different than the Peshtigo, Chicago, Manistee fire.
Wow.
Right? So now, go back down to the Napa Valley fire, and I will read you this, and I think you'll begin to see how interesting. Let's see. So the inferno swept up over a wooded ridge like many California wildfires do, but this one was different. Like a tear in the night, this wall of wind-whipped flames took direct aim for the heart of a city. Not just the rural outskirts, not just the homes high in the hills or off the grid. The Tubbs Fire, one of 14 wildfires that scarred the people and property of 8 Northern California counties late Sunday, right? So this is Sunday. As I said, they broke out like an onslaught of fires across a wide swath of Northern California broke out almost simultaneously. And what was the date of those fires? Here's the www.businessinsider.com. Quoting, a series of fires sparked in the Napa Valley on October 8th.
Oh, my God.
And grew as the powerful winds pulled the flames across fields and freeways, etc.
Holy crap.
And we need to chart these out on a map to see the trajectory over the years.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Is that something plausible? Like,
oh, yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
At least 15 people have died in Northern California after what officials are describing as an unprecedented wildfire that has already destroyed 2,000 structures and devastated large swaths of the wine country. Quoting the fire captain spokeswoman for CAL FIRE, the state agency responsible for fire protection. This is quoting her. We often have multiple fires going on, but the majority of these fires all started right around the same time period, same time of night. It's unprecedented.
Oh, my God.
Oh, man.
So just as an interesting point of reference, the date of the peak of the Draconid meteor shower is October 8th.
Oh,
Yes.
wow.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Brett. I wasn't going to mention that, but since you figured it out on your own, yeah, that's exactly right.
That's
now, think
why
about
we
that.
call
Think
him the
about
Watcher.
All right, Mr. Watcher. Think about the imagery here.
The dragons.
Why is it called the Draconid meteor shower, right? Because all meteor showers are named after the radiant point from which they emanate in space. Now, let me tell you this. The Draconid meteor shower is the big constellation of Draco, the cosmic serpent. The radiant point of the Draconid meteor shower, which peaks on October 8th, is directly targeted on the mouth of the serpent. So here we have the fire-breathing dragon.
Oh, my God.
Fucking wow.
Holy crap. That was a great sequel, Randall.
All right. Well, I'll let you guys sleep on that one then. So
All right.
Snake
I'm
Bros.
going to sign off.
All right. Thanks, man.
We'll hang up this
we
time.
promise we won't call you again.
Okay. All right. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Awesome.
All right. There you go, round 2.
That's right. 2 interviews with Randall Carlson in one show. Ladies and gentlemen.
All right. You guys can get a hold of us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. You can visit the website at brothersoftheserpent.com. Check out the snake skins and the encyclopedia and the glossary. All that good stuff.
Follow us on Twitter at Snake Bros with no vowels, SNKBRS. And don't forget to share the shows. And if you can, donate to our pyramid scheme to send us straight to pyramids.
Straight to pyramids.
Send us pie, $3.14. We love it.
And if you can't do that, at least give us a review. Very much appreciated to all of you who have done so and all of the donations. We love you guys.
We love you guys so much. Also, don't forget about History Shift at History Shift on Twitter, and look him up on YouTube because he has been making all of our YouTube videos, and he is nearly done with our entire back catalog of shows.
Wow.
Yes. So thanks so much to that guy. And also, I want to give, he has been doing some amazing research. He's in Montana. He's been doing some amazing research into glacial erratics and dolmen-looking things that are out there, trying to find out if they're man-made or whatever. He's been going on these hikes, and he requested that we find out if anybody from in that area would like to join him and go out on these Snake Bros, Snake Forest scouting things for dolmens.
Yes,
so
do it.
Look, if anybody lives around there and you want to do that, look up History Shift on Twitter and get a hold of him because he wants buddies to make sure that he doesn't die when he's out there looking for dolmens. Okay?
Yep. Also, if you want beautiful, great sounding acoustic panels for your studio or your podcast studio or your living room, look up, or actually send an email to our friend Kmart at acousticpanelingsolutions@gmail.com.
That's right. And all of this with Randall Carlson was set up because we signed up to go to the Contact at the Cabin, which we talked about during the show with Randall, but I just want to reiterate. We are going to Contact at the Cabin. We will be there for the entirety of that conference. It's a very small, basically 25 people per session. There's 3 sessions. So if you guys want to go do that and be there with us and Randall Carlson and the dudes from Grimerica and a whole bunch of other people that are interested in this stuff, sign up. The spots are going fast, people, so sign up now.
Yeah. And we want a special thanks to Grimerica for setting up that whole thing. And
that's right.
All the people that are working on it, getting everything done. There's a lot of details to work out, and everybody's doing a great job, and we really appreciate it. And we appreciate the opportunity.
And we are so happy to be a part of this crew. So,
yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. We love you, Adamu. Get back to work. Randall Carlson.